After recently retiring from the sheriff's office for more than 13 years, both my husband and I, you can imagine that we still have daily contact with many of our very good friends. And we have personal knowledge of how short-handed the deputies are out on the road. They're short-staffed. Now, this is obviously a concern not only for the deputies, because it is a officer safety issue, but it's also a concern for the citizens. And I've talked to many of the spouses of the law enforcement officers who are protecting our citizens, who are absolutely outraged that their spouses are out there working shorthanded and don't have any backup. What do you plan to implement to help bring the patrol division up to staff?
The first thing I want to do is I want to examine what we're doing. And I know a lot of elected sheriffs want to be everything to everybody. We can't. Absolutely can't do it. I mean, you can make this campaign promise. That's fine. You will not deliver. It's not going to happen. Everything to everybody means the neighbor's sycamore tree is dropping leaves in your yard. You call the sheriff's office because those leaves are trespassing on your yard. So many sheriffs want to roll a deputy to that because that's a voting citizen. Well, you know what? Yeah, that's a voting citizen. But we got to think a little bit more globally. We need to keep that citizen safe. And those leaves dropping on the yard are not keeping them safe. Incessant dogs barking simply because they're barking, not because they're barking at a prowler, but the neighbor that has the dogs that are constantly barking. I'm sorry, I realize that that's a hassle to you, but is that the best expenditure of our deputies' time? ATVs rolling up and down the power lines, the power line roads. These things, they're annoying. Some people could call them quality of life issues because they're loud. And now, granted, if we could be everything to everybody, we should deal with that. But the first thing in assertive policing, we have to take a look at what our deputies are responding to, what our deputies are dealing with. And we have to eliminate the things that are not calls for police service. If they're not calls for police service, I'm sorry, we have to protect the public. We have to focus on police service type calls. So the first thing we're going to do is take a look at what our calls for service are and what we should eliminate and what we shouldn't eliminate. The next thing is the reserve program that I'm very, very big into. And a lot of people, and I noticed that the appointed sheriff, prior to me talking about reserves, was really pushing auxiliary deputies. There's a big difference between an auxiliary deputy and a reserve deputy. An auxiliary deputy is not a law enforcement officer. There's somebody who they go through an amped up type of citizens academy, an auxiliary academy, and they gain their powers from that officer that is with them. They have to be with that officer. They have no police powers whatsoever without that officer. It's a neat program. It really is. It doesn't help fight crime. Reserve officers, and I know of a dozen right now that are looking to get on different agencies. They're driven by the desire to continue serving. What happened with these folks is they probably did their 20 years at Tampa PD or St. Pete Police Department or Miami Police Department. They retired at 43, 44 years old. And now they're just kind of doing little odd jobs and they're having a good time for 2 years or so. And they think, wow, I really need to get back into it. I really want to get back into service. But I don't want to be a full-time law enforcement officer anymore. I want to keep my certification active and I want to serve the community. So these are who you draw from when you hire reserve officers. And a lot of people have asked me, what's the compensation? These people come on and do this for free, or they'll go out and they'll work a zone once a week, or they'll go out and they'll just back up deputies 2 or 3 shifts a week. What's their motivation? Their motivation is they want to serve, A. B, it's still in their blood, and C, they're young enough to still make an impact, and also the huge incentive for it is if you decide that after you've been out of law enforcement for 4 years, and you decide, wow, I want to go back to work at Hillsborough Sheriff's Office or Hernando County Sheriff's Office, you have to go through the entire police academy all over again. Not a lot of people in their mid-40s, early 50s that want to do that. By being in the reserves, they are a certified active law enforcement officer. And they have a lot to give, and believe me, that is huge incentive enough too, is that you're letting me serve the community again, and you're keeping my certification active. You worked hard and long for that certification. To have that thing go away with 4 years of inactivity, a lot of folks don't want to do that. Reserve programs are growing exponentially in the law enforcement community across the United States. Tampa Police Department has an incredibly robust reserve program that's used to augment and help the patrol deputies that are on the streets. I've had some questions about that. Well, what about, are these reserve folks going to take away anything from our deputies? No. People are afraid. Are your reserve officers, you're going to allow your reserve officers to work off-duty details, which would take those away from our deputies? No. They're not going to be compensated. The one thing I would like to see, and I plan on speaking with the FOP about this when I start the reserve program, is I want the reserve officers covered. I want them to be allowed membership into the FOP for the legal representation. Because if you have a reserve officer out there and he or she gets into a bind, they should have the ability to be represented just like any other officer. And that's the thing that bothers me, I guess the lack of knowledge that a lot of citizens have about labor unions and law enforcement. It does not affect the taxpayer's dime at all. That officer is paying in. He or she is paying for their monthly membership dues. It's not on the taxpayer dime. But that in a nutshell, and plus the other thing I want to do as well, I need to take a very strong look at, and we're going to start this August 15th. We are actually going to start the transition, taking it from mind and paper and start putting the nuts and bolts together with it. We're going to have to take a look at every function in the sheriff's office to see if it backs up patrol. To see, is this thing really needed, or should this be merged into patrol to put more deputies on the street? I don't know if the citizens really realize how short-handed we are out there. I don't know if they would really sleep well if they realized how short-handed we are out there. So if we have to do with a few less detectives over here, a few less specialists over there, to add and to augment patrol, we have to do that because patrol is the backbone of the police service. Patrol officers can live without detectives. Detectives cannot live without patrol officers. It's prioritization.